I call the Honourable Minister, Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, I'd just like to start off by paying tribute to the Honourable John Carter, who gave his valedictory speech in this House today after 24 years of fantastic service to the people of Northland and the New Zealand Parliament, and I certainly wish him well in his new post as High Commissioner to the Cook Islands. But Mr Speaker, while I was listening to that speech, I was sort of thinking, is this really showing us where Labour is going wrong? Because when you listen to the member Moana Maki there, you heard a very sort of garbled, economically illiterate message, poorly crafted in a totally unsaleable way. And I was thinking, if you sent that member out there to my electorate of Northcote on the North Shore of Auckland, sent her down to Birkdale, where people are having probably not the easiest economic time, but are actually understanding what this government is trying to do, you would find that member with that message would be met with completely blank stares. There's a fundamental disconnect, Mr Speaker, between the message that that crowd there thinks is saleable in New Zealand and the message actually that the people of New Zealand are hearing. And what they've seen with this budget is that we've got a government that has a clear direction, that knows that we've got to balance the books and is predicting clear economic growth in the years ahead. And if you want a simple message, I mean, basically next year we are halving the deficit, we're halving it the year after, and then it's gone. And who can argue with that? That member was talking about families struggling, families who are angry. Well, I'll tell you what, they'll be pretty angry if we get a Labour Greens government back. I tell one what, Mr Speaker. They would be pretty upset because, in actual fact, the cost of living will be going through the roof. Because what a Labour government would do, Mr Speaker, they would be putting tax rates up, they would be crippling our prime export earner farming with a punitive ETS that comes in 2 years early, and I can tell you, they would be finding that it's very, very difficult for the average person in New Zealand under a Labour government because there is absolutely no plan. But under this government, you see here in this budget a clearly laid out manifesto for the coming election. And it shows we're going to be getting rid of debt, we are going to be growing jobs, 170,000 jobs. The Prime Minister in question today clearly laid out where they're going to come from. We're going to be seeing more money going for the more vulnerable. We're going to see growth in vital public services and New Zealand returning to prosperity, Mr Speaker. So quite clearly, the public of New Zealand are going to have a choice at this election. They are going to be able to choose between the sound economic management of a proven government with a Minister of Finance who's delivered a fantastic, sensible budget which is going to get this country on the right track, with a Prime Minister who has worked in world business, he's worked in the money markets, he knows how economies work. Or you can contrast that, Mr Speaker, you could have Phil Goff, who has promised $5 billion in unfunded spending promises, which this crowd over here, should they ever retake these Treasury benches, they will be expecting the public of New Zealand to fund. And what's even worse, Mr Speaker, Phil Goff just doesn't understand the details of his own policy. So when he announced an R&D tax credit of $800 million, he didn't understand that fundamentally you cannot cap a tax credit. And when it's actually fully priced out, we're talking $1.55 billion. So, Mr Speaker, why would the public of New Zealand trust the possibility of a Labour government who don't understand the books, they don't understand their figures, when they know that under National things are getting better all the time? And if you want to talk about a party rewriting history, it's these people over here who keep on talking about tax cuts for the rich. Well, the fact of the matter is that 2/3 of the tax cuts went to the lowest two tax bands. 75% of the tax cuts went to 2/3 of the population. So you can see that it's not actually as those people that they get so angry, Mr Speaker, because they don't like to be contradicted. They think they're going to be able to go around the country telling, frankly, Mr. Speaker, well, what one could ungenerously call untruths. They can go around telling things like, tax cuts for the rich. They can talk about selling assets when they know it's actually just a falsity. Because the question that the public are going to have to answer, OK, if we're not going to progress with the mixed ownership model, which is going to raise between $5 and $10 billion, how are these guys over here going to make up the difference in revenue? How are they going to do it? The revenue spokesman should get up and say. Well, the clear answer, Mr. Speaker, is they are going to borrow more and more. So they're not focused on the deficit. They're not focused on reducing debt. They are focused on borrowing more money so they can fund more election promises, and it's a reckless plan for economic failure. And Moana Maki, she was trying to make out that the last government left the books in a decent place. Well, look, if you look at the fact, $1 billion to buy Kiwi Rail, that is nothing short of economically irresponsible for an asset which now you'd be struggling to get $100 million for. So if you think that that last Labor government did anything other than fund election promises, you're absolutely wrong, because that is what they did all the way through. KiwiSaver had become unsustainable, working for families completely unsustainable, student loans unsustainable. We've had to shake that back into a decent package that is sustainable and affordable for New Zealand in the long term. And if you go out and ask people in the streets, they know that we are on completely the right track. Someone over there claims that the student loan measures are ageist. Well, I can tell you, for every dollar lent to people over 55, the state was getting 3 cents back. And suddenly, because we've made a change to make the policy affordable, we're ageist. Well, actually, we've been completely practical about this, and in the long term, I can tell you, people are going to thank us. If you want to look at how well the economy is actually doing, last month was a record month for New Zealand exports. Exports exceeded imports by $1.1 billion, and that is the biggest margin for a month in the history of New Zealand. Commodity prices going through the roof. It is great for the New Zealand economy. And I feel sorry, actually, for really practical people like Stuart Nash, who has left there. He knows what's going on, but he's got the sad job of day after day having to get up and put up incorrect arguments that back up his failing leader, Phil Goff, because he's a loyal guy, but he knows he's going down with the sinking ship. And I'd say the major danger over there at the moment, Mr. Speaker, I know the Speaker has a safe seat, but we could see, if you look at half those members over there now, they'll be gone. Because what's going to happen is, as those polls continue to decrease, people like Darian Fenton, they are going to get more and more desperate. They're going to be calling for more and more left-wing extreme socialist policies to try and shore up the base, and the harder they try, the lower it's going to go. But, Mr. Speaker, if you look at some of the really positive spending initiatives in this budget, health, $2.2 billion over 4 years. What an amazing difference we've made in health. 1,000 extra nurses and 500 extra doctors since this government came to power. People are getting sicker. That's not actually true. Mortality and morbidity rates have actually improved over time. Steve Chadwick knows that. I don't know why she'd say something so ridiculous. New Zealanders no longer have to go to Australia for cancer treatment, Mr. Speaker, under this government. There are 400 extra operations per week, Mr. Speaker. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, that last government, they were culling people off operating lists. Education, another $1.4 billion over 4 years. They will try and make out, they'll spread the falsehood that ECE's been cut. Well, actually, it's gone up by $550 million. Kindergarten teachers are getting a pay rise. You can see the theme, Mr. Speaker. There's clear progress being made. The economy's growing. Jobs are predicted to come by Treasury, who, quite frankly, if you think they're not optimistic, well, you want to go and talk to them for a while. They're economically some of the most pessimistic people you'd ever meet. Talk to any bank economist. The forecast for job growth are even higher. But that crowd over there, they are going to go around feasting on a diet of doom and gloom. They're going to tell New Zealanders how bad it is. But ultimately, Mr. Speaker, one cannot fool the people. The people know who's on the right side of the argument, and I'd have to say, Mr Speaker, it's the National Government.